Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our worship service. I want to say thank you so much to all of our youth who helped lead us in worship last week. Using their gifts to lead us all in worship is such a beautiful thing for our congregation. And I'm still thinking about what our youth intern, Kristen Buck, said last week about finding a battle buddy to do life with, reminding us that the Christian life was never meant to be done alone. We'll be praying for Kristen as she graduates and as she begins her experience as a missionary in Honduras. And I'm sure she'd be happy to tell you more about what she's looking forward to if you get a chance to send her an email or give her a call. I'd like to turn now, though, instead of talking about the future, I'll talk a little bit about the past. In 1966, the Supremes recorded a song that went to the top of the Billboard Pop Singles chart. Later, about 16 years later, Phil Collins would re-record this song, and it would once again become a hit, especially in the United Kingdom. The song was written as a musical memory of a daughter reflecting on her mother's words to her, specifically words about being patient when finding the love of your life. This song was actually written loosely inspired by a gospel song called You Can't Hurry God, written in the 1950s. But this song I'm referring to today, this influential Motown classic, was called You Can't Hurry Love. You Can't Hurry Love. And the lyrics of this might be going through your mind right now, but just in case it's been a while or you haven't heard it before, some of the lyrics go like this. My mama said, you can't hurry love. No, you'll just have to wait. She said, love don't come easy, but it's a game of give and take. You can't hurry love. No, you'll just have to wait. Just trust in good time, no matter how long it takes. And it's true, isn't it? You can't hurry love. Love slows us down. And when I think about slowing down, I think about all of the ways I learned to do the exact opposite. I think about all of the ways I learned to hurry up, keep it moving. One of the memories I thought of when I think about being taught to hurry up is as a first-year student in high school, I was very involved in student government, and the student council president, a senior at the time, was someone I thought was probably the most accomplished person that there's ever been. And so one day, I listened closely as she gave me some leadership advice. She said, it doesn't matter if you have nothing to do or if you're doing nothing, just walk fast and carry a clipboard, and people will think that you're doing something important. People will think that you're important. Looking back, this was hilarious. But nonetheless, the first-year student in high school, me, really bought into this. I got a clipboard, I carried it around, it probably had a blank piece of paper on it, and I walked very, very fast. You can probably feel through your screen the coolness of freshman Zach just coming through. But you see, this hurried and perhaps inauthentic approach to leadership might have worked in high school, and it might not have worked in high school, but it definitely would not work for us today when we aim to be Christians who lead and serve. That's because Christianity is not about our own importance. It's not about making people think that we're anything other than what we are. Our goal as Christians, and the mark of our success, if we have to use those terms, is that we become more and more loving with each passing day. That we have an ever-increasing amount of grace that we're able to extend to one another. It's kind of tough, though, because as we know, love is patient, and grace is generally pretty annoying. When we love people, when we show them grace, that means we have to slow down. When we love people, and when we show them grace, we have to remember that we're not the main character in the movie. We're supporting actors at best, and generally, more like extras. And this is why when I go on walks with my son, I don't get mad at him for not being able to keep up with my pace. I love him. So I slow down and I see the world as he does. Before the hurriedness of adulthood and before he can ever even comprehend what a to-do list might be. I slow down because I love him. Love slows us down. This is also why, if you're visiting someone who is sick or who is suffering or who is sad or deeply hurting, you don't go to them and say, okay, I have 5 minutes, so let's get the highlights moving and then we can go from there. We don't do that. We enter into their world where they're at right now and we hear them out. That's because love slows us down. This is also why, this can be hard to hear, sometimes churches move slower than corporations. Our focus is not expediency or productivity or efficiency. Our goal is love, imperfect love. Love that requires a greater threshold of grace and a love that slows us down. The Micah 6-8 Book Club, one of our study groups, one of our life groups here at the Baptist Church of Westchester, a group that's focused on the scriptural commandment to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God, recently read a book called In My Grandmother's House by Reverend Dr. Yolanda Pierce. If you haven't read it, I do think it's worth your time. Reverend Dr. Pierce shares the wisdom of her grandmother, wisdom such as Jesus consistently did 3 things: healed people, told stories, and fed people. And that is all her grandmother, as a follower of Jesus, had to do to live a life that was pleasing to God. And Reverend Dr. Pierce, who's a professor and also the dean of Howard University's School of Divinity, illustrates some of her grandmother's wisdom in her book. And at one point, she tells a story that I think masterfully illuminates the way that love can slow us down. Now, in this story, Reverend Dr. Pierce is also walking quickly, but for a very different reason than I was back in high school. Let me tell you more about that by reading some of her story. She wrote, "I am a New Yorker, and we walk fast, even when we have nowhere to go. So when I came up behind the young couple walking slowly and holding hands, taking up the entire sidewalk, I was frustrated. The sidewalk is narrow, and I am angrily walking behind them. The sidewalk is narrow, and I cannot pass them unless I walk into the busy street. I just want to get home, and I have no patience for their love, for their whispered words, for their entwined hands forming an obstacle between me and the clear path ahead. Exasperated by their pace, I am forced to slow my stride. In my impatience, I resolve to simply walk behind them until we can get to the curb, where I will overtake them at the light and give them a mean stare. They must be tourists, I think, the worst kind of tourists for this busy city sidewalk. Young, clueless about their surroundings, and deeply in love. I prepare my face to reflect my exasperation. And at the corner, I turn to them and get ready to sigh audibly. I need them to see my face and hear how they have inconvenienced a whole city with their hand-holding human barrier. But what I see when I truly look at them startles me and convicts me. They are young, impossibly young, and so deeply in love that they cannot even register my face, giving them my fed-up with slow-moving tourist look. They are alone in a crowded city, cocooned in a place that my impatience and my ill temper cannot touch. He lifts her hand to his lips and kisses her fingers. I turn away, ashamed of my mean thoughts and embarrassed at witnessing such a deeply personal moment. The set of tightly knit hands that barricade against my efficient walking is actually a protected hedge around this young love, a love that will be assailed on every side by forces small and great. Newly planted love needs encouragement and not angry glares of exasperation. I fix my face and offer them a smile, and I continue ahead of them. It occurs to me as I walk away that I am now rooting for them. I am now hoping that in 50 years there will be gentle kisses of hands lined with spots and wrinkles. I am praying that in 20 years others will be able to witness their matured love, the love that stands the test of time. And though they are strangers to me, I want their loving cocoon to survive. I want them to succeed where many of us have failed. I want them to have an enduring love that weathers the storms and sorrows that will surely head their way. I needed this reminder that most of the lessons I have learned about God's love have come from outside of the church. There were no Bible studies or Sunday school lessons on how to fall in love or what to do when love breaks your heart. The tenderness between this young couple, their public displays of affection, and their unapologetic love for each other is a needed reminder that I am also worthy of gentle and compassionate and unconditional love. They are a reminder that God intends for us to be in relationship with one another, that God has, in fact, created us for one another. Now, I love this story. I love that she prepares to give such a mean look when she's inconvenienced by this loving couple. She even prepared the stare and her exasperated sigh. She was ready to let them know that they were being very annoying and inconsiderate. And then, as it so often does, love stops her in her tracks. It calms her heart. And this annoying couple that slowed her down reminded her that she too is worthy of love and of grace and of relationship. Certainly, in the book, there were other times where Reverend Dr. Pierce was that reminder to other people. But I found this story of the way that love and grace annoyed her and then transformed her to be both relatable and compelling. The love and grace of Jesus has a similar effect on us. It can annoy us, and it will, but it will also transform us. So, it seems that you really just can't hurry love because love slows us down. But there's another side to this too, isn't there? Sometimes love does make us hurry. Sometimes love requires our urgency. Sometimes patience is a guise for indifference, allowing injustice to continue on. Sometimes people are suffering, are hurting, are crying out in pain, and our choice to move slowly does more harm than good. The prophet Amos in the Old Testament, for example, calls for justice to roll down like waters and to have righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. He does not call for a trickle of justice in due time. He calls for oceans and oceans of justice right now. The Gospels teach us this too, about the urgency of love. We see an incredible example of that in the story of Jesus healing a paralytic. This story occurs in Matthew, in Mark, and in Luke. And today we'll focus on the passage in Luke. Luke chapter 5, verses 17 to 26. This passage occurs right after Jesus calls the first disciples and cleanses a leper. Let's get into that story. We can set the scene a bit by saying that this passage occurs in a crowded room, a crowded home with standing room only. It's hard to imagine right now, but take yourself there in this crowded room where people were hearing Jesus teach. And verse 17 says, "One day, while Jesus was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting nearby. They had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with him to heal." Now, in that verse, we see that Jesus' fame had begun to spread, and the Pharisees and the scribes, those religious experts and scholars, were there trying to hear him. They had come from all over and were unsure if they are there to really hear his teaching or to kind of catch him with some kind of error. We can interpret that the Pharisees were uncomfortable with the authority in which Jesus was teaching. And they were people who were very concerned with the strict adherence to the law. They wanted the community to be holy, to live lives that were dedicated to God's laws. But what they didn't understand, that we have the benefit of knowing now, is that Jesus did have that power and authority from God's self. And so in the midst of this teaching now, at verse 18, we learn that just then some men came in, and the Mark passage tells us it was 4 men, and they were carrying a paralyzed man on a bed. They were trying to bring him in and lay him before Jesus. But finding no way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up to the roof and let him down with his bed through the tiles in the middle of the crowd in front of Jesus. The roof of the house was likely Mediterranean, perhaps consisting of wooden cross beams and then a matting of reeds and branches and mud, dried mud. And I'm sure that the homeowner did not appreciate this gesture, but Jesus certainly did. We know that because we read in verse 20, when Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven you." And I think that's incredible. If you back up and read that again, we see that Jesus saw their faith, their collective faith. And I wonder, did the urgency, the hurried nature of these men who brought the paralytic to Jesus, did that enable them to contribute to his upcoming forgiveness that we'll see in just a moment? I think that has powerful implications for us today, if that's true, that we can help lead others to forgiveness. So in verse 21, we hear that the scribes and the Pharisees began to question, "Who is this who is speaking blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Now, as they're pondering this either to one another or in their hearts, it's a big deal that they are suggesting that Jesus was engaging in blasphemy. At the time, it was certain that forgiveness of sin was up to God and to God alone. And to claim the forgiveness of sins is, in some sense, they believed, to mock God. If Jesus did not have the power and authority of God, then there might be some truth to what they were accusing him of. In one Old Testament passage, blasphemy is described as lifting one's eyes haughtily against God. And so Jesus, like he often does, responds to this question with further questions. In verse 22, we're told that when Jesus perceived their questionings, he answered them, "Why do you raise such questions in your heart? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven you,' or to say, 'Stand up and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has the authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the one who was paralyzed, "I say to you, stand up, take your bed, and go to your home." Now, here at this point, we see the point of the story. The healing has more to it than just the healing. It's designed to demonstrate the power and the identity of Jesus, the authority of Jesus. And then in verse 25 and on to 26, we read that immediately the man stood before them, and he stood up, took what he had been lying on, and he went to his home, glorifying God. Amazement seized all of them, and they glorified God, and they were filled with awe, saying, "We have seen strange things today." People were shocked to see Jesus doing this. And the word strange here, I think, could also be translated as amazing or marvelous or incredible. Mark says that the people said something to the effect of, "We have never seen anything like this before." And that was exactly the point. Jesus was showing that he was different. Now, while the story fundamentally demonstrates the power and authority of Jesus and what Jesus had come to do, I'm moved by two key aspects of this passage. First, I am moved by the urgency, the incredible hurriedness that it took for these four men, these men to come and to bring the paralytic to Jesus. They saw the crowd and they couldn't wait. They came through the roof to get that man to Jesus. I was trying to think about this. I was trying to imagine, what if the church had the kind of urgency when it came to dealing with the things that paralyze us today, or the things that we as a church universal need to seek forgiveness for? Things like racism and sexism and ageism and materialism, consumerism, and other such evils. What if we wanted to urgently address those? Can you imagine that instead of prioritizing institutions, which in a sense that's what the Pharisees were doing, the Pharisees were prioritizing their own authority over interpreting the law, them and the scribes. They wanted to preserve their stance in the community. Can you imagine if the church was less worried about their stance in the community and instead prioritized those who were struggling, who were suffering, who were crying out for help instead? Can you imagine if we prioritize those who our religious communities have intentionally or unintentionally ignored? Can you imagine if out of a love for Jesus, a belief in the power and authority of Jesus, we as a church would prioritize those people, the marginalized in our own communities? Can you imagine if the problems we have avoided just couldn't wait to be solved? The second thing that I'm incredibly moved by in this passage is the courage of the man who, after experiencing Jesus' words for forgiveness, stands up when Jesus tells him to do so. He had every reason to believe that nothing would be different. We're unsure how long he had been paralyzed, but it could have been for a long time. We have every reason to assume that this man had been struggling and ostracized by the community, often equating sin and sickness. Those of us who know what it's like to face chronic illness or ongoing struggle know that one of the hardest things to do is to believe that somehow life could be different than what it is right now. But the man nonetheless steps up with his bed or his mat, and he is empowered then to participate in his own healing. He is offered agency, he is offered liberation, and finally he is offered homecoming. How I long to be a Christian like this, who can have this kind of courage, this kind of commitment, this kind of urgency. Maybe there are times where you can't hurry love, that love requires patience. But maybe there are other times where hurrying is the most loving thing that we can possibly do. May we have the wisdom and the strength to be patient and to hurry, all because of the love of Jesus. Amen. At this time, Pastor Dan will offer our benediction to close our service today.